It was a kind of late afternoon that draped the town in soft honey-colored light, the kind where even time seemed to pause for a breath. Calla Hartford had just finished wiping down the last of the teacups when the bell above the door jingled, startling her from the quiet hum of the kettle. The shop was empty, just as she liked it this time of day. Peaceful, predictable. But then the stranger stepped in. He was tall, maybe a little older than her, with a weather-worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder and eyes like the sky after a storm. Not striking, just oddly familiar. He paused just inside the doorway, looking around like he was searching for something that should still be there, but wasn't. Calla watched him with polite curiosity. "You just missed the rush," she said with a half-smile. He smiled back, slow, almost reverent. "That's all right. I didn't come for the rush." He stepped forward, looked up at the chalkboard menu, and said, "Do you still have the jasmine lemon verbena blend?" Calla blinked. No one had asked for that tea in 5 years. Not since her grandmother passed. She hadn't written it on the menu. Hadn't made it since. The jar still sat at the back of the shelf, dusty and half full. A blend her grandmother had created and called Remembrance. "I haven't served that in." "I know," he said gently, "but it's always been your favorite." A strange chill passed through her, but not an unpleasant one. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Do we know each other?" He smiled, not apologetically, not smugly. "Just knowingly." "We did," he said, "a very long time ago." Something in his voice tugged at her chest, like a forgotten melody or the scent of a place you haven't been in years. Against her better judgment, she turned and fetched the old jar, measured the leaves, let them steep in silence. When she handed him the cup, he took it with both hands and said, "Thank you, Calla." Her name on his lips made something flutter in her ribs. He took a slow sip and closed his eyes. Still perfect. She couldn't help herself. "Seriously, who are you?" He looked at her, not with surprise, but with softness, with the sort of gaze that carries 100 untold stories. "My name is Elias," he said, "and I think we were in love. Once, maybe twice. This time, I'd like to stay longer." She stared. Words didn't form. And before she could speak again, he added, "I know it sounds mad, but I remember things. About you. About us. You had a scar on your wrist from a rose thorn. You used to hum when you chopped herbs. You made a promise on a bridge during a thunderstorm. And when I died, you told me to find you again." Calla took a slow step back, suddenly dizzy. He wasn't guessing. He was remembering. "I've had dreams," she whispered, voice shaky. "But that's all they were." He smiled gently. "I know. That's how it starts." And just like that, like a petal drifting into tea, something settled between them. Not certainty, not logic, just recognition. She didn't believe him. Not entirely. But she didn't tell him to leave, either. Because something in her, the part that dreamed in thunder and jasmine, was already listening. Calla didn't sleep that night. She closed the shop at 7 as usual, wiped the tables, locked the front door, and then sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea she couldn't taste, replaying every word he'd said. A scar from a rose thorn, humming while chopping herbs, a promise on a bridge. These weren't details you could guess, but they weren't exactly impossible to find. Either were they? Still, when she looked at the scar, faint and crescent-shaped on her wrist, she felt like it looked a little sharper than it did yesterday. The next morning, he was already sitting outside the shop when she arrived, legs crossed, sketchbook in his lap, as if he belonged to the routine she hadn't yet started. "Did you sleep?" he asked, not teasing. "No." He nodded. "Me neither. It's always like this in the beginning." She narrowed her eyes. Beginning of what? He looked up at her and smiled, not with triumph, but patience. Remembering. He came every day that week. ordered the same jasmine lemon verbena blend. Never pushed, never pressed. Instead, he offered stories, small ones, gentle ones, like, the first time we met, you were a baker's daughter. I burned my hands stealing fresh bread. You taught me how to dance once when I had 2 left feet and no rhythm. You laughed so hard you cried. We never made it past 30 that time, but it was still the best life I've ever lived. She wanted to dismiss him, say it was charming delusion, some beautifully crafted act, but she couldn't because she started dreaming again. Not of vague things, but places. A wooden bridge with a red ribbon tied to the railing. A kitchen with herbs hanging from the ceiling. A seaside village where someone with storm-gray eyes kissed her beneath a lantern that never flickered. And in every dream, his face, or something close enough to it that her heart always ached when she woke. On Thursday, he brought her an envelope. Inside, a sketch. A portrait of her, not as she was, but as someone else. Her face softer, hair longer, wearing an unfamiliar shawl. But her eyes, those were hers. On the back he'd written, "You liked me better when I was a poet. I'm trying again." She couldn't stop the smile that tugged at her mouth. Still, she asked, why now? Why me? Why this life? Elias paused before answering. Looked down at his tea, like it had the words she needed. Because this is the first life where I found you, and you weren't already in love with someone else. Calla said nothing, but she poured him another cup, and this time she made one for herself too. The shop had always been a kind of sanctuary, a place for old recipes and quiet mornings, for books with cracked spines and kettles that whistled like they remembered. Calla's grandmother, Maribel, used to say that tea could read people better than any fortune teller. The leaves always know, she'd smile, folding her palms around a mug. They just speak quietly. Calla never believed it. Until now. It was a rainy afternoon when she finally opened the chest in the back room, the one she hadn't touched since Maribel passed. Inside, a stack of tea journals, yellowed pages, tiny notations in her grandmother's looping, delicate handwriting. Each blend cataloged with precision, taste notes, steeping times, healing properties. And in the middle of the fourth book, tucked between notes on chamomile and hibiscus, a recipe, jasmine lemon verbena, for remembrance, for return for the soul that waits. Best brewed when someone who's been lost finally finds the door again. Calla's breath caught. She read the line 3 times before flipping the page. More notes, little sketches of leaves, lines that weren't recipes but poetry. He always returns with the same eyes. She never remembers first, but the tea helps. This blend should only be served when it's time. Calla sat back on her heels, heart suddenly aflutter of questions. How did Maribel know? Was this just coincidence? Family folklore? Or had she lived it too? That evening, Elias came in late, soaked from the rain, hair dripping, breath visible in the air. I walked, he said sheepishly. Didn't want to risk missing you. She poured him the tea without asking, placed the journal on the table between them. He froze. His hand reached for it slowly, reverently, like someone touching the past they'd tried not to hope for. Calla didn't speak. She watched his fingers trail over her grandmother's writing. Then he whispered, I think she knew. I think she remembered too. Calla looked down at her hands. The same hands that had stirred tea for years, always trusting the blend, never the story. But now the story was unfolding whether she believed it or not. What does that make me? She asked. Elias looked up. Someone who gets to choose. Memory or not, this time is still yours. They drank in silence. Later, when she closed the shop, she found a single jasmine leaf at the bottom of her cup. Perfectly whole, floating like it had something left to say. She didn't throw it out. She pressed it between the pages of the journal, right beside her grandmother's note. When she sees the leaf, she'll know it's true. The town's autumn lantern festival arrived like clockwork, always the first full moon of October. For most, it was a celebration of warmth before winter. Cider, paper lights, laughter braided through the air like ribbons. For Calla, it was background noise, something quaint she never truly participated in. Too many people, too many reasons to smile for tradition's sake. But this year, Elias asked her to come. Just for the evening, he said, eyes lit soft in the cafe light. You don't even have to smile if you don't want to. I'll do all the smiling for both of us. She laughed, despite herself, and nodded. So they went. Lanterns floated through the streets like quiet stars. The air smelled of cinnamon and with smoke. Children wove through the crowds with scarves trailing behind them like little comets. And Calla, bundled in a too-big coat, walked beside Elias without speaking for a while, because words felt too small, too earthly for the way her chest buzzed like she'd been here before. They passed a bridge. Wooden. Familiar. She stopped mid-step. The railing was cracked in the exact spot she'd seen in her dream, where the red ribbon once fluttered, tied with trembling hands. Her breath caught. I know this place, she whispered. Elias turned to her. You do. He didn't say how. He didn't need to. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a ribbon, not red but gold, worn thin by time. Calla stared. I found it in the back room 2 nights ago, he said softly, folded into the pages of your grandmother's journal. She took it, fingers trembling. A memory stirred, barely a whisper. A rainy night, a boy with ink on his palms. A promise made between thunderclaps and starlight. If we forget, find us again. Find me again. Her knees nearly gave. Elias caught her by the elbow, not dramatically, not urgently, just as if it was always meant to happen. They sat on the edge of the bridge, legs dangling over still water. He didn't rush her. Eventually, she said, I don't know if I believe in past lives. That's all right, he said. I believe enough for both of us. She smiled, not because she was sure, but because something in her had been waiting to smile like that for a very long time. They tied the ribbon to the bridge. Together. And she didn't ask if they'd tied it before. She didn't need to, because whether it was the first time or the 5th, it felt like a promise finding its way back home. Calla woke the next morning with the gold ribbon still tied to her wrist. She hadn't planned to wear it, hadn't even remembered keeping it on, but there it was, soft and real, like the thread of a dream that refused to unravel. She stared at it while the kettle warmed. Her fingers brushed the worn fabric as if it might speak. Elias hadn't texted. He didn't push. He never did. She both loved and hated him for it. The shop was quiet. Soft rain painted the windows. A couple of tourists drifted in, sipping chai and marveling at the stillness of her space. She smiled where needed, nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere, on bridge railings and forgotten promises, on the strange familiarity of a stranger who seemed more at home in her life than she sometimes felt in her own skin. It had been 2 weeks since he walked into the shop, 4 days since the festival, and now Calla found herself at a threshold she hadn't named, one not built of doubt but fear. Was she falling for him because of who he was now, or because he claimed they'd already loved before? She didn't want nostalgia. She wanted choice. That evening, she found him sitting beneath the ivy arch behind the shop, a spot Maribel used to sit when she wanted to read in peace. He looked up at her the way he always did, like time didn't matter. She sat beside him. I need to ask you something, she said. Anything. If I told you to stop talking about the past, about other lives, other versions of me, would you? He didn't hesitate. Yes. She blinked. Just like that. He nodded. Because the only version of you I care about is the one sitting beside me. She looked away, not because she doubted him, but because something inside her had been bracing for disappointment, and now didn't know what to do with relief. You don't need to believe in anything, Elias continued, voice steady. You don't need to remember. You just have to decide. She turned back to him, searched his face for expectation. Found none. Only patience. Only hope. I don't know what this is, she said quietly. You don't have to, but I want to try. A small smile curved his lips. Then let's begin here. They didn't kiss. Not yet, but when she reached out and took his hand, their fingers laced together like they had done it 1,000 times before. And for the first time, Calla didn't wonder whether it was destiny. She wondered whether it could simply be this. It was late on a Sunday, the kind of quiet, unhurried evening that wrapped the town in lavender light. When Calla found herself standing in front of the tea shelf, fingers dancing absently over jars she'd memorized by heart. Jasmine, verbena, chamomile, hibiscus, memory, remembrance, comfort, but none of them felt right. Not for this. Not for now. Elias was in the kitchen, humming off-key as he washed mugs, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the way he belonged there, gently, without asking, still startled her in the best possible way. She didn't want to make the tea, he remembered. She wanted to make the tea for who they were becoming. She pulled 3 jars from the shelf, combinations she'd never tried together. Rose petals, orange peel, and wild mint. She added a few slivers of ginger root on instinct and a pinch of cardamom, just because the scent made her think of warmth that stayed. She brewed it slowly, not measuring, letting her hands choose. When Elias returned, she handed him a cup. He took a sip and blinked, then blinked again. You made this up. Calla shrugged, suddenly shy. There wasn't one for this moment. He took another sip and smiled, not with nostalgia, not with memory, but with presence. It tastes like starting over, he said. She nodded. That's what I was hoping for. They didn't talk much after that. They just sat on the floor by the windows, drinking in silence, knees brushing every so often. The blend had no name. But over the next few weeks, customers began asking for that new one, the one that feels like laughing after a long cry. Calla never wrote it on the menu. She simply kept a jar of it on the shelf behind the counter, labeled in pencil, Elias. He never said anything about it, but he always reached for that jar when he made tea for both of them. One night, while they closed the shop together, she asked, "Do you still believe we've done this before?" Elias looked at her, gentle and steady. "Yes. And if we hadn't, if this was the first time?" He leaned against the counter and said, "Then I'd still love you like I was lucky enough to be here for the only time that mattered." She kissed him for that, and when he smiled into it, she thought, maybe the point was never remembering. Maybe the point was simply recognizing what's real and choosing it again. They left on a Thursday. No plan, no bookings, just a second-hand map with coffee stains on the corner and no name circled, only a note Calla scribbled at the bottom. Let's find somewhere we haven't dreamed yet. Elias had packed the bags, 2 toothbrushes, 3 books, and a tin of Elias blend tea. Calla brought her grandmother's kettle. That felt like enough. They closed the shop for a week, left a note on the door. Back soon, learning how to get lost. They didn't use GPS. Instead, they let road signs choose for them. Towns with names like Wisteria Hollow, North Willow, and Brook End welcomed them like places built from the edges of forgotten lullabies. They stayed in old inns, ate too many croissants, took photos only of shadows and clouds. Elias sketched everything. Calla wrote poems she didn't show him yet. One evening, they found a lake so still it reflected the sky perfectly. like standing between two worlds. They sat barefoot on the shore, toes in the sand, silence stretching comfortably between them. "Do you think we'll keep finding each other?" she asked. He leaned back on his palms. "I think if we do, it'll be because we keep choosing to. Not destiny. Not fate. Deliberate returning." Calla exhaled. That night, she dreamed her first time not of a past life, but a future one. A bookstore. A garden with wind chimes. A child laughing in a sunlit kitchen. And a man who looked at her like she'd never once had to be anyone but herself. She didn't tell Elias. Not yet. But the next morning, she asked him if they could stay in the town a little longer. "Sure," he said, half asleep. "What's it called again?" She didn't know. Didn't care. Because when you carry home in someone's voice, the name of the town doesn't matter. They spent the day learning the alleys, trying new kinds of tea, talking to old shopkeepers who told stories that had no punchlines, only weather. And that night, back in a small rented room with two thin curtains and the scent of lavender soap, Calla finally said it. "I love you, not because we might have done this before, but because I've never done it quite like this." Elias didn't reply immediately. He just pulled her hand into his and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I love you, too," he whispered. "And this time, I'm staying." When they returned to the tea shop, the front door creaked open like it was happy to see them. Dust hadn't gathered much. The ivy on the back trellis had bloomed early, and inside, everything looked almost exactly as they'd left it, except for the little blue and white teacup sitting perfectly centered on the windowsill. Calla frowned. She hadn't placed it there. She was sure of it. It was her grandmother's favorite cup, delicate porcelain with a faded chrysanthemum at the bottom. She hadn't touched it in years, afraid it might break. But here it was, spotless, warm with sunlight, and something inside it. She stepped closer. Inside, nestled like a folded memory, was a piece of paper, the kind Maribel used to leave when she wanted Calla to find something at just the right time. Calla's breath caught. She opened it slowly. The note was old, faded ink, gentle hand. "When he finds you again, you'll feel in your ribs before your head can catch up. Don't be afraid of remembering. But don't forget to build something new." No signature, just a little pressed leaf, jasmine, crumbling softly at the corner. Calla sat down on the window bench, blinking too fast. Elias joined her, leaning over her shoulder to read. He didn't ask how. He didn't have to. "She knew," he said quietly. Calla nodded. She always did. They sat there for a long time, fingers laced, tea growing cool beside them. Then, without warning, Calla stood up and crossed the room to the shelf where she kept the blends. She reached behind the newer jars, past Elias, past Remembrance, and pulled out an empty tin. She opened it, still empty, but she dropped the letter inside, then sealed the lid. "This one's called Beginning," she said. He smiled. "No ingredients?" "Not yet, because not everything had to be known in advance. Some things could be brewed slowly, steeped in days that had yet to arrive." The next day, a customer came in and asked, "Is there a tea for when you don't know what you need?" Calla pulled a tin from the shelf, placed 2 pinches of something unmeasured into the pot, and said, "Yes, but you have to be willing to let it surprise you." It took her 3 more seasons to change the sign, not because she was unsure, but because some promises deserved to steep slowly. By the time spring returned, the town had shifted in subtle ways. The ivy grew thicker around the door. More regulars came in not just for tea, but for stories. The air always smelled faintly of citrus and cinnamon, and people swore that whatever blend they drank was always the one they needed, even if they never ordered it. Calla called it intuition. Elias called it magic. Either way, They agreed it worked best when served warm and unhurried. One quiet Thursday, just before closing, Calla stepped outside with a brush in one hand and a tin of warm paint in the other. Elias leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with that smile, the one that always said, "I'd wait through lifetimes for this." She reached up, took a breath, and painted the new name over the old signboard, the tea shop between lifetimes. Elias exhaled softly behind her. Calla turned and met his gaze. "This isn't just for us anymore," she said. "It's for anyone who's been waiting for something they can't name." He nodded. Or someone. That night, she brewed the first pot under the new name, a mix of lavender, bergamot, a pinch of lemon balm, and something unlabeled. She didn't taste it. She just knew. They sipped in silence by the window, legs tangled under the table, the moonlight tracing lines across the floorboards like handwriting. "Do you think we'll forget again?" she asked. Elias reached for her hand. "Maybe. Would that scare you?" He shook his head. "No, because next time, maybe you will find me first." She laughed, soft and full, then stood, walked to the old journal still resting behind the counter, and wrote the final line. "This time we remembered, and even if we forget again, we'll know where to begin." The man walked in just before closing. The shop had grown quiet. Rain misted the windows, turning the world outside into watercolors. Elias had just flipped the sign to closed when the bell above the door jingled. He was old, not frail, but full of that particular stillness found in people who've learned to carry entire seasons inside them. His coat was too thin for the weather, and he held a wide-brimmed hat in both hands like it meant something more than shade. "I'm not here for long," he said, voice dry but kind. "I'm looking for a tea I don't remember the name of." Calla, still wiping down the counter, smiled gently. "That's all right. Describe it to me." He paused. "It tastes like something you once loved," he said, slowly, "and forgot, but it remembers you." Elias raised his eyebrows from the corner. Calla, heart beating in a strange rhythm, nodded once and turned toward the shelf. She didn't reach for Elias, didn't reach for remembrance or comfort. She reached for the unlabeled jar tucked into the very back, a jar she didn't remember placing there. Inside, a blend of marigold petals, dried apple skin, and a sliver of rosemary. She steeped it in silence. The scent was unfamiliar, and yet it felt like something Maribel might have served to someone who had nowhere else to go. When she handed the cup to the man, he took it like a ceremony, tasted, and exhaled, a single breath, shaken and deep. He didn't cry. Not quite, but his eyes glossed with something that felt older than grief. "Thank you," he whispered. "I thought it was lost forever." Calla swallowed. "You've had this before?" He nodded once. "Not here. Not now. But yes." She tilted her head. "Do I know you?" The man's smile was weary, distant. "Not in this life. But once, I think, I taught you how to read poetry out loud." The air in the room pulsed. Not with magic, with memory. He didn't stay. Finished his cup, left a few coins, and paused at the door. "You should write this one down," he said. "Even forgotten need a place on the shelf." Then he was gone. Calla stood still for a long moment, then turned to Elias. "Did that feel like—" Elias nodded. "Yes." They wrote down the ingredients that night, called it Return, and added a note to the jar, for when you need to remember who you once were and forgive who you became. They hadn't meant to find it. The drive was supposed to be a short getaway, one of those last-minute plans where the map stayed folded and they let intuition lead. A left turn here, a winding road there. They followed signs for a weekend market and ended up in a sleepy riverside town with more birds than people. It was Elias who spotted it first. A wooden bridge, half hidden behind overgrown willows, weather-worn and quiet, spanning a stream that looked too shallow to need crossing. He stopped mid-sentence. Calla nearly walked past it before she noticed the look on his face. Then she turned and felt something tighten in her chest. The railing cracked on the right side, the moss between the planks, the way the air around it seemed to hold its breath. It was the bridge. Their bridge. The one from her dreams. The one from Elias' memory, where thunder once clapped above their heads and a promise was made between lives. She stepped onto it. Each board creaked in welcome. The water below murmured softly, like it remembered. Elias stood beside her, hand brushing hers but not quite reaching, the way he always did when he wasn't sure if she needed space or presence. Calla knelt near the cracked railing. Her fingers brushed moss aside, and there, carved into the wood, barely visible beneath decades of rain and time, were 4 letters. C+E. She froze. Did you? Her voice caught. Elias knelt beside her. His hand touched the engraving, and something in his face changed. Softened, aged, steadied. I didn't know if it was real, he whispered, or if I imagined it all. Calla blinked fast, heart in her throat. How could we have carved it? This place, it doesn't even look like it's been touched in years. Elias smiled faintly. Maybe the lives we lived before were more stubborn than we thought. She laughed, watery and stunned. They sat on the bridge for a long time, feet dangling over water, the trees rustling like pages being turned. Before they left, she pulled a small pencil from her bag, the kind she kept for writing orders. Below the carving, in tiny script, she added, "Found you again." It happened without warning. No fall, no trauma, no fever. Just a strange stillness one morning when Elias walked into the shop and found Calla staring blankly at the menu chalkboard, a dishcloth in her hand, unmoving. "Calla?" he said gently, stepping behind the counter. She turned, and the look in her eyes unraveled him. Polite, curious, empty. "I'm sorry," she said, tilting her head. "Are you here for tea?" Elias froze. His breath stilled. "No," he said carefully. "I'm here for you." She smiled, kind but distant. "We've met." He nodded, forcing calm into every cell of his body. "Yes." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he whispered. "But it's okay that you don't remember." He didn't push, didn't explain. Instead, he sat at the corner table, the one he always did, and ordered the same blend he had the very first day. She brewed it as if for a stranger, and in that moment, he was one again. Days passed. Calla served customers, laughed at their jokes, remembered their names, but never his, not in the way she used to. Elias returned every day, ordered a different tea each time, told her stories, not their stories, but new ones, fables, dreams, pieces of their love cloaked in fiction. He left no clues, only presence, only patience, until one day, 10 days later, she paused while pouring water into a steeping pot, frowned, then looked up at him and said, "You always sit at that table." He smiled. "I do. I've been having dreams," she added, "of a bridge, of tea, of someone who says he's waited for me." Elias tried not to breathe too loudly. Calla stared at him for a long moment. Then, softly, "You told me once that love wasn't remembering. It was choosing." Elias nodded. Her eyes glistened. "I don't remember. Not really. But something in me keeps choosing to look for you." He stood, walked to her slowly, held out his hand. "Then let's start again." And when she took it, the kettle behind her whistled, a long, low sound like an exhale. It happened during the quiet hour, that stretch of late afternoon when the last customer is gone and the shop holds its breath before evening. Calla was cleaning the tea shelf, humming without thinking, when the sound came, a soft crack. Not loud, not shattering, just enough to make her freeze. She turned. One of the display cups on the high shelf had split clean down the side. Not fallen, not dropped, just cracked. It was an old one, faded pink glaze, hairline veining like tree roots in winter. She didn't remember ever using it, but it had always been there, nestled near the jar of remembrance, slightly too delicate to touch. She took it down carefully. The crack was deep, running from rim to base, nearly invisible unless you held it to the light. And there, tucked inside, so carefully it could have been missed by anyone who wasn't looking, was a small, curled piece of paper. Calla's breath caught. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Maribel's, for the day she forgets, because she might. Calla sat down without realizing. Her hands trembled. The note continued. If you are reading this, and his name no longer feels like yours, know this. You've already loved him more times than you've remembered, and he will love you through the forgetting. So don't panic. Just drink the blend called Beginning. It always knows how to lead you back. Calla looked up, stunned. Elias was watching her from the other room. She held out the paper. He came slowly. Read it. Said nothing. Just reached for her hand and kissed the back of it. I found that blend again last night, she whispered. It made me cry, and I didn't know why. He smiled. Now you do. They brewed beginning together that night. Neither said much. But when she sipped it, she closed her eyes and whispered, You smell like rain. Elias blinked. What? Calla opened her eyes, smiling faintly. I think I remember the bridge. And outside, the wind picked up, soft and warm, like it too had been waiting to carry something home. The couple came in on a rainy Tuesday. Calla could tell they weren't local. She had a radar for that. They entered together, but sat apart. He pulled his chair back with a little too much force. She didn't take off her coat. The air around them buzzed with tension, not loud enough to hear, but sharp enough to feel. She approached the table with her usual softness. Something warm for both of you? The woman offered a polite nod. The man stared out the window and mumbled, Sure, whatever. Calla didn't ask questions. She returned to the counter and stood for a long time in front of the blends. Comfort was too soft. Remembrance too risky. Beginning too personal. So she reached for 3 unlabeled jars, not one she'd ever combined before. Cinnamon, licorice root, a whisper of dried cherry blossom. The scent was warm, nostalgic, a little sharp at the end, like a truth that almost went unspoken. She served it without a word. The couple didn't thank her, just sipped quietly. The first sip changed nothing. The second, the woman looked up. The third, the man frowned. I know this, he said. His wife tilted her head. What? He swallowed. This flavor. This was in that thermos you brought on our first road trip. That little hike in the hills. Her eyes widened. You still remember that? You spilled it down my shirt. You didn't stop laughing for 5 minutes. I didn't stop loving you for 5 years. The word sat between them, soft, scalding. The tension broke. He reached across the table. She didn't pull away. They spoke quietly for a long time after that. Not about the fight, not about blame, but about tea, memories, rain, and the hike neither had mentioned in years. When they left, the woman turned back to Calla and said, What was that blend called? Calla smiled. It doesn't have a name. Yet. They walked out hand in hand. Elias, watching from the kitchen doorway, raised an eyebrow. You knew? Calla shrugged. I didn't. The tea did. That evening, she wrote the new blend on a label and tucked it behind the others. First flame, for when love feels lost, but the memory of warmth still lingers. The child couldn't have been older than 8. She entered the tea shop just after sunrise, when Calla had barely unlocked the front door. No parents in sight, no backpack, no coat, just a little denim dress, a spiral-bound notebook clutched to her chest, and hair the color of dusk. "Are you open yet?" she asked. Calla, blinking sleep from her eyes, smiled. "Almost." The girl stepped inside like she'd done it before. She walked straight to the table by the window, the one Elias always claimed, and sat down, placing her notebook gently on the surface like it was something sacred. Calla followed, curious. "Can I help you with something?" The girl looked up, eyes dark and calm and older than they should have been. "I'd like a cup of tea that tastes like stars." Calla paused, heart caught midbeat. "Stars." The girl nodded. "Not the big kind. The ones you see when your eyes are closed, and someone says your name like they remember from somewhere else." Calla sat down across from her. "You've been here before, haven't you?" The girl nodded again. "I think so. Not like this, though." Elias emerged from the kitchen, then, brow furrowed. He saw her, stopped mid-step. Calla noticed the way he stared. The girl noticed, too. "You look like someone I used to follow," she said to him softly. "You drew pictures of birds that didn't exist, and you always cried at the end of books." Elias didn't answer, just sat slowly beside Calla. The girl looked between them. "You found each other again," she said with a smile far too knowing. "That's good." Calla's fingers tightened slightly on her apron. "Who are you?" The girl opened her notebook. Inside, a sketch, a bridge, a ribbon, 2 figures holding hands in silhouette. "I'm not sure yet," she said, "but I think I might have been someone who loved you once." And for the first time in a long time, Calla felt her knees go weak, not from fear, from recognition. They made the tea together. Calla chose dried blue lotus, vanilla bark, and silver needle white. The girl sipped it, nodded, and wrote a single word beneath her drawing. Again, it started with thunder. Not the kind that arrives like a warning, but the kind that feels like memory rumbling under your skin. The sky was slate gray, clouds heavy with secrets, and the first crack came just as Elias reached for the kettle. Calla paused in the doorway. "You hear that?" He nodded. "Smells like a storm with something to say." They didn't turn on the lights. Let the shadows stretch long across the floor. Customers wouldn't come in weather like this, and they didn't need them to. The tea shop felt like it was holding its breath. Calla moved toward the jars. This time, she didn't reach for familiar ones. Elias joined her, fingers hovering beside hers. She chose elderflower. He added cinnamon. She found moonbeam mint, a rare herb from Maribel's locked drawer, and he followed with a whisper of dried plum. They didn't speak. They brewed slowly. Rain tapped the windows like a rhythm. They both remembered. And when the blend was done, delicate, warm, strange in all the right ways, they sat by the window with 2 cups and watched the world disappear into gray. Calla took the first sip, closed her eyes, and something in her shifted, not like memory, but like understanding. "This isn't for us," she said softly. Elias nodded. "No, it's for the ones who come after." She set her cup down and fetched the last page of Maribel's recipe journal, blank, untouched. She wrote, "Unnamed blend, for the soul that no longer needs to remember, only to rest." They left the ingredients vague. Didn't measure. Didn't explain. Just enough notes to suggest how it might be made, but not so many that it couldn't become something else in someone else's hands. And then, beneath it, in small, weather-worn script, Calla wrote, "If we meet again, let it be in rainlight." Elias signed with only an initial, then placed the journal on the highest shelf. Outside, the thunder rumbled once more. Not angry, not loud, just remembering. They noticed her before she spoke, because she didn't. A young woman, wrapped in a navy coat several sizes too big, walked into the shop one fog-laced morning and paused just past the threshold. She didn't look around like most first-time visitors. She didn't reach for a menu. She didn't smile. She simply walked to the farthest corner table, the one by the bookshelf no one ever browsed, and sat. Calla approached gently. "Would you like some tea?" The woman looked up, and Calla saw eyes like deep water, quiet, unreadable, the kind that carried too much for someone her age. The woman nodded. "But," she said softly, "can it be the kind that doesn't require me to explain anything?" Calla blinked, then smiled. "Absolutely." She brewed slowly. Not return, not comfort, not remembrance. She chose dandelion root honeycomb bark and violet leaves, a blend that tasted like quiet company and soft blankets. The woman drank it in small sips. Didn't take out a phone. Didn't ask for sugar. Just sat. An hour passed. Then two. Calla didn't interrupt. Elias offered her a second cup without a word. When the woman finally stood, the shop was empty. The fog had begun to lift. She left a folded napkin under the teacup and nodded once to Calla, a thank you that needed no sound. Then she left. Calla waited until the bell above the door stopped chiming, then walked over, unfolded the napkin. Inside, a sketch. Simple pencil lines, but drawn with aching care. It was a shop, her shop, but older, with ivy growing across the windows, and two lanterns where none existed now. A small child stood out front, holding the hand of a taller figure who looked exactly like Elias. On the back, one sentence. "I think I've been here before, but not like this." Calla pressed a napkin to her chest, breath hitching. She didn't know who the woman had been. Not in this life, but maybe in another. She didn't frame the sketch, didn't copy it, just tucked it into the drawer with all the others. Because some memories aren't yours to keep. They're just yours to hold for a little while. It was a rainy evening, the sort that tapped gently on the windows without urgency, just a steady reminder of time passing. The last customer had gone home. Elias was upstairs sketching. The shop was silent except for the soft clink of ceramic and the hush of steam. Calla was reorganizing Maribel's journals again, not looking for anything, just touching the pages, letting her fingers skim the past. She paused at the first journal, the oldest one. The paper was stiff with age. The ink had faded to sepia. It smelled like lavender and dust. Most pages were well marked, stained by time or tea. But one entry stood out, clean, untouched, written in Maribel's sharp, confident hand. "Blend for the heart, I keep hidden from myself." The recipe was simple. Yarrow, linden blossom, pear skin dried just past ripe. It wasn't labeled for memory, healing, or comfort. Just truth. Calla brewed it on instinct. No hesitation. As it steeped, the scent filled the air, not sweet, not herbal. Something between. Something that felt like a feeling she hadn't let herself have in years. She poured a single cup, sat in the window seat with the rainlight behind her, and took a sip. It hit her before the swallow. A deep ache, not of pain, but of recognition. Tears blurred her vision without permission. She didn't sob, didn't break. She simply cried, quiet, clean tears that carried no story, only weight. Calla didn't know what memory it pulled from her. Maybe it wasn't a memory at all. Maybe it was a feeling of finally coming home to her own skin. When Elias came down an hour later, she was sitting still, cup empty, eyes calm and red-rimmed. He knelt in front of her. She smiled at him. I think that was the first time I felt everything. All at once. and let it happen. He nodded. Was it for me? He asked. She shook her head. No, it was for me. She wrote it down that night under a new name, unspoken, for when the words stay caught in your chest, but the heart is ready to be heard. It was a clear morning. Blue skies, gold sun, wind humming soft chords through the ivy. Cal and Elias had gone for a walk. A simple ritual, something they did every Tuesday before the shop opened. They liked the way the town smelled in the early hours. They liked the quiet. They liked holding hands without needing words. They returned an hour later. The door was closed, but unlocked, the way they had left it. But the moment they stepped inside, they froze. The kettle was already boiling. Steam rose from 2 cups on the counter, freshly poured. The blend inside was unmistakable. Elias, the very same one they had created together that night. They decided to begin again, but neither of them had made it. No one else was there. No notes, no footsteps, no signs of entry. Only the 2 cups, warm, waiting. Calla walked slowly to the counter, touched the ceramic. Still hot. Elias looked around, eyes sharp. Did you? No. She picked up her cup and took a cautious sip. Perfect. She didn't tremble, didn't smile. She simply looked up and said, I think the shop remembers. Elias exhaled. I was starting to wonder. The shelves were untouched, the chairs unshifted. But something in the air had changed, like a breath had passed through the room, not from lungs but from wood and memory. That evening they stayed late, didn't speak much, just wrote down a single new note in Maribel's last journal. The shop made tea today. For us. Maybe it always knew. Below that, Calla added, if you're reading this and you're alone, make a cup of anything and wait. The silence here is never empty. They closed early that night, left the lights low, and as they walked upstairs, Calla turned once more to glance at the room below. A single candle had lit itself in the window. She smiled. Good night, she whispered to the space, and the flame flickered like a nod. To you, whoever you are, whenever you arrive, if you're reading this, then the tea shop has chosen you. This place is old, not in years, in memory. It listens, it remembers, and if you're quiet enough, it'll answer. We built no rules. We left no instructions. But we left stories, steeped into walls, tucked behind jars, scribbled into pages that don't care what year it is. You don't need to believe in past lives to belong here. You just have to believe in returning. And if you're wondering whether love is real, yes. It brewed here daily. C and E. Once, always. Calla placed the envelope inside the oldest teacup on the shelf, the one with a crack that had never widened. She kissed the rim, then turned to Elias. Ready? He held out his hand. They stepped through the door together. Didn't lock it. Didn't say goodbye. Just let it stay open. For air, for ghosts, for whatever soul might stumble in next, and ask for tea that tastes like stars. Because some places don't end. They just wait. The true end.